Most people blame AI when they get bad results. The wrong tool, the wrong output, it doesn't work for us. But here's what's actually happening. The tool isn't broken. It's probably your process. Raja Akanuru has spent 20 years applying process engineering to technology, and his take on AI adoption is one of the clearest I've heard. Stop prompting, start designing workflows, because garbage in, garbage out isn't just about prompts. It's about trying to automate too much, too fast, without a system behind it. His framework is simple. Find a process waste. Find that place where you need additional capacity. Build the smallest viable version that gets you a win, and then you scale from there. Don't automate the entire RFP process, as an example. Just automate one small part of it. Prove that there's ROI there, and then you can ask for additional resources and additional support. That's how you get buy-in. That's how you change the culture. In this episode, Raja breaks down exactly how to build AI workflows that deliver, and how to sell them internally when your leadership isn't just as convinced as you are. Let's check it out. Hi everybody, Erick Prospero here, and today we're going to be discussing AI workflow design with industry leader Raja Akanuru. He has over nearly 20 years of experience designing scalable technology in healthcare education. With a strong foundation in software development and business, Raja is adept at applying technology and process engineering tools to improve healthcare outcomes. I'm really excited because we're going to be thinking beyond traditional prompting, more about creating practical workflows in the context of AI, so they're useful and produce valuable results. Now, before we jump into the content, Raja, can you tell us a little more about yourself?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me here. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I am Raja Akanuru, working in the technology space for the last 20 years. Started off my career as a developer, where I was actually ingrained into building codes and workflows for people. Fell in love with customer interactions and solving real-world business problems. So then shifted my career from engineer to a solutions consultant. So in my current role, I work with organizations really trying to apply process engineering to understand where the maximum value is and try to build in technology to help organizations harness the value. So it's been an exciting experience so far, and looking forward to achieving more with the AI.
Wonderful. Now, let's break down the context of this conversation. Why does this matter to industry professionals, specifically in the association healthcare space?
Great question, Eric. As I'm going through these meetings with customers and working at different presentations, I think a core area that I receive is feedback from customers about AI implementation, so generative AI. What's amusing to me is there's always this diverse set of perspectives where one group feels like AI is terrific, it's giving me exactly the output I need. And then on the contrary, I feel like there's another group of people who have not really gotten the best output out of AI. And what is a little more challenging is the group kind of abandons the use of AI, and they have a very different perspective about AI as a whole, and then they completely shut the doors at that point, which could be the case for some scenarios. But overall, when I try to talk to them, learn more about how they're approaching it, I could definitely see some areas where bringing in a structure and process towards AI projects could probably move the needle more towards AI adoption. And again, I'm not saying it's a solution for every problem, but there could be certain problems that could be solved better by a structured use of AI. And that's where I think the workflow and that process mindset could be useful.
Now, that makes perfect sense. I know the type of results varies on the input, but I know the cliche in the industry is garbage in, garbage out, right? But what you're talking about is more of a system and a process around it, right? Targeting it on a very specific process and a framework that delivers consistent results.
For sure.
Now, when it comes to developing this workflow design, how granular should we go in terms of breaking a process into sub-processes for a minimal viable AI?
So the way I like to think about it is, I think the tool is as effective as you tend to apply it. So I don't know that AI is necessarily broken, but the way we are applying it will determine whether it's broken or if it's going to give us the maximum bang for the buck. And the components that I'd like to break it down is like, I think 3 components. The first component is define where your process waste is, identifying where you feel the efficiency is, and then we move on to the minimum viable product, which is the second component of the workflow. Where the minimum viable product is very useful is how do you break down the problem into smaller component that is enough to convey the value? And I think that's where there's always subjectivity involved, which is, are you going to take a problem and try to solve it in its entirety? Or can you identify a smaller portion of that problem and try to get the best use out of it and then demonstrate the ROI before going to the next one? So for example, when I was starting, and I'm sure all of us have gotten that idea when we were thinking about, hitting the gym or going through your steps every day. So usually everyone says best practices, don't start with a 10,000 step goal. You are going to get yourself into trouble if you don't achieve it. And then you go into that cyclical loop of negativity if you don't meet that 10,000 step goal. Oftentimes they say start slow. So just start with 50 steps or 500 steps in day 1, make that consistent, and then increase your number of steps day 2, day 3, and day 4. Minimum viable AI is no different. Start with the smallest version and then incrementally build upon it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And the interesting thing is we're applying this practice to our media workflows as well. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with any of the AI video tools out there, but if you were to take an entire 7-minute script and punch it into one of these tools, completely hands-free, you're not going to get a good video, right? It's because you're asking too much of the system, right? You're automating everything. And so what we decided to do is follow our traditional process, right? Which when you're creating a video, it goes from script to creating individual assets that are based on a storyboard and then animating according to audio. So instead of trying to automate that entire structured process, which again, that's that overarching goal, which maybe we'll get there. I mean, I think by the time the technology's there, we're going to have different types of problems. We have had a lot of luck just breaking those little steps down, whether if it's a script, this specific scene of a video, or this specific asset. And then once we do that enough, we can combine everything together. So I definitely can get the approach on breaking it down into a small process to get that win. Because even if there's some efficiency there, right? A lot of times what we have seen in the industry is they try to automate too much and they expect to harvest all of this efficiency or this cost savings in terms of time, and then nothing works, as opposed to taking that small win, right? We made step A in this 10-step process 50% more efficient. That's a huge win, right? That's I know you didn't automate everything, but that's something very important to consider.
100%. And I think even you can probably attest to it in your media production as well. You learn from that first segment that you did. It's easy for you to course correct the second segment because now you're not doing 7 steps at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Then we have a standard process. We know what the limitations are, what works. And now what's great about this, and I know I keep going back to interactive media and video, that's our specialty, right? So that's where we're using this. What we have found is we know the limitations of the tools out there when it comes to automation. So we have workflows for all these individual assets in a storyboard, and now our outputs are a lot more accurate. There's less revisions, and it's becoming a lot more consistent. And now the trick that we have is, okay, how do we teach this to 40, 50 animators, right? But yeah. The good news is we have instructional designers, and that's what we do. It's just sometimes we forget that, right? We're like, okay, we have to train everybody. I wish there was a solution. Wish there's a solution for that, and then we think, oh yeah, we have instructional designers on staff. Let's put them through the process. Now, what are some common mistakes when defining the AI role in this workflow? Like, what type of issues do you see people run into that they're causing?
Yeah, I think a part of it is most of the things that I'm hearing from people is not necessarily intentional misses, but it's really a part of it is it's an art. I mean, if we have a problem and you and I approach it in terms of dividing it, chances are that we may not both approach it in exactly the same increment that makes the most sense. For example, I might author the video in like 2 minutes and you might say, Raj, I feel comfortable, I'm just going to author it in like 5-minute segments because of your expertise with what you're doing. So a portion of that the challenge that you hear is really about being intentional about how you break it down, but then defining what that increment is in terms of it being valuable. And that's where I think there's a little bit of, I'd say, process improvement principles that you could apply, like lean improvement principles. Or some of us who may find this to be a newer term, lean was a process manufacturing, process improvement initiative that was pioneered by Toyota as a part of the Toyota production system. And because they deal with so many different parts when you're manufacturing a car, they try to come up with a structured process of manufacturing and making sure that the production system is being efficient. So I really like that framework when we think about process improvement in technology or initiatives, where you are picking up the smallest segment that is most valuable for you in a workflow. For example, the most common example we see with education technology and the use of AI is disclosure management. So if you're into accredited medical education, some accredited providers are required to collect disclosures from the faculty, make sure that there's no conflict of interest when the faculty is speaking about a certain topic. So let's take that example, basic disclosure management. Everyone wants to use AI to automate 500 records of faculty disclosures all at a time. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if AI could do that and then give you the result in a click? It would be great, right? The challenge, however, is we have not mastered the AI analysis of disclosures if you just dump in 500 line items at the same time. You can apply the same thing even for evaluation analysis. If you have an open-ended evaluation and you're looking at analyzing 500 lines of evaluation, chances are that you're probably not going to be successful if you try to do it all in one pass. So the way we like to break it down is you decide what your minimum increment is. I tried it with 1 record. For me, I wanted to make sure, let me master the disclosure for 1 record. Let me understand the evaluation for 10 records. Let me prompt, apply a structured process towards prompting, understand where the limitations are, and then perfect it better. So I think back to your question, the way you break it down into smaller segments is subjective. So you want to understand that. 2, try out something. And if you feel like it's not working out, break it down further. Don't be afraid to fail. Nobody's judging you here. Try out with whatever you think is your best gut in terms of the smaller segment. If you feel like it's getting complex, it means it's not small enough. And that's why I say, don't over-engineer the problem than it's needed. Go with your gut, pivot as needed, and then iterate again.
Love it. Again, you're talking to the right person. We a big part of our production system for animation, media, interactive content was based off the Toyota way. So I have a supply chain background. It's something that we lean into when we started this business 10 years ago, because there was a need for a ton of content. And to your point, instead of focusing on the larger system, there are going to be a few categories, right, that deliver the 80% of value that we need, right? It doesn't have to be the entire approach. I'm a big fan of that Pareto principle, where instead of trying to automate everything, and for us on the media creation side, again, very simple process. Typically it's script, storyboard, the creation of assets, and then interactivity/animation. What we have found in our process for content development is the 20% that mattered, that gave us the most trouble, that just took a ton of time in terms of hours, was asset creation. Now the challenge we have is it's still kind of difficult to automate the creation of assets that are suitable for the rest of the process. However, if you break it into smaller units, right, smaller topics, and you're a lot more focused, we definitely see the benefit. So I love the approach to focusing on what matters, right?
100%. And love the example too, Eric. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of the challenge that we have, right? Because AI, it's adapting with this new AI software and technology that we have, it's an iterative process. There's going to be a lot of experimenting, a lot of failure that happens, and we encourage it. We make it We have a budget of 100 hours in terms of production every month that we invest in this. And what I mean by that is we're constantly testing ideas and experimenting. And we get a lot of things that don't work, which is okay, right? We're completely okay with that process. But the good news is we're finding things that do work. And once you hit that golden nugget, right, that where you start to save some time, when you start to produce things not just faster but better, right, more aligned to what you guys were expecting, how do you standardize these inputs to ensure consistent outputs across teams? Like, what do you do to create this standardized effect to make sure everyone is following the same collaborative process with AI?
Yeah, great and very important question, because I strongly believe one-off prompting gives you answers to questions, which is great, but unless you come up with a standardized process and a workflow, you're not going to get consistent outputs from everyone. So I believe prompting gives you the answers, workflows give you the consistency. And so that's why it's important to standardize the operations across multiple groups. The AI tools also build in these consistent frameworks in terms of standardizing it. You know, if you're a user of Claude, you've seen how you can have a claude.md file where you can have all your instructions standardized in a document. So you make sure that when you're working through this iterative process, whatever is your standard set of framing the problem, you know, what's the background, what's the input, what's the output, having every member have their own artistic way of asking the prompt. I love artists. I love the way you can be creative. I do believe in best of both worlds. Get the creative juice out of your team members. Try to standardize it so that you get the best of both worlds. You get the art of designing a prompt, get it from multiple people, standardize it in a document. Most AI tools do have a structure in place, whether it's in Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot. You have a way where you can put in all of those things in a centralized location. And then the second thing is communication. Once you have a process in place, how are you collaborating together to further improvise that standard document? In our office, we have a dedicated Slack chat that talks about Claude AI. Claude AI improvements is a dedicated Slack channel where when we are trying out all of these AI stuff, we immediately give feedback in the same Slack channel so that whoever is managing the MD file, the main file, they get feedback from all of us. And then we do lunch and learns periodically so that the team is now bringing in the expertise, bringing in the Slack conversations, and then we are having the interactivity where we're just asking each other, how are you doing it? What's your secret sauce? What's your best use case? And then the last component is we have like fun contests where you are making it fun, where you're saying, hey, what's the best use of AI? The best idea gets a sugar candy or a sugar treat or a $25 gift card or something. So just make it more fun and an engaging activity, loop in that process. And I don't think what I shared is groundbreaking. I'm sure all of us do it in some way or the other, but I do feel like being intentional where you have the standardized file, have a communication framework, have your lunch and learn, you have that in person, and then make it a little more friendly competition. We all love getting gifts and celebrating with our family. Kind of build that structure around it so that you have the iteration mode baked in.
Love it. And what's great about what you're saying is it's simple to execute, right? There's nothing complex about it. Creating standardized documents for loading. And I know the focus is on workflow. One of the things we recently implemented was more of a principles first methodology. So when we're loading documents and ideas or prompts into whichever LLM, which we're trying to standardize on our part two, we have different tools for different things. Now, a big part of the documentation involves a worldview, our identity, as well as constraints. And what's great about this is now we're getting pushback, right? Just imagine with this new process we implemented 2 days ago, I asked ChatGPT something and it said, hey, the way you're asking this question is wrong because of XYZ. You shouldn't think about it this way. You should do it this way because you value this. And
that's incredible.
Firstly, I was kind of insulted because it was right. It's like it kind of made me sound lazy. I was thinking, okay, great, and it just shows once you have the standardized process, these principal workflow documents loaded, you're no longer running into that garbage output, right?
Yeah.
And I love the consistent focus on innovation. I know, as I mentioned, we do this monthly test, but again, it's easy to say and talk about, but I think it just comes down to management making it a habit, right? And sticking with the habit more than a month or so. Because one of the issues I think every organization has is they get a bunch of ideas, they get a lot of enthusiasm, but 2 months in, priorities shift, they're focused on a conference, they're focused on XYZ. And so it's my personal goal this year to keep that buzz and energy going. And so I love the idea of contests. And I think one of my personal issues, and I'm rambling a bit, but I think I have to let more autonomy with the team, because all of our experiments are controlled, right? We're funding them, we're encouraging the team, but they're following a process that we're dictating. So I definitely like the fact that you have a more open environment that's decentralized on AI innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be surprised. I'm sure you have that too. You'll be surprised when you just open it out for people and then give them a more relaxed environment to experiment. You'll be surprised as to what are some of the things they end up building. One of our employees ended up building like an app that takes care of their favorite movies. And it was a vibe coding app. Now, granted, some of our movie buffs might have it on the fingertips as to what movie you want to watch, but I felt like the application of it was so relaxed and something relatable. They said, I just built a vibe coding app about the favorite movie I'd like to watch. I'm going to give it inputs on who's my friend circle, which group am I meeting, what kind of movies they like, and then the AI is going to start talking about movies and then pulling in the platforms where it's playing.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, just think about what that does to team culture. So I love that approach, because the funny thing is, while you were talking, you just reminded me that even though we have these controlled experiments, the most recent process that was a win for us was from like a random experiment somebody else did. So yeah. I love this conversation. It's making me want to revamp some of our initiatives and get everyone going again. Now, I know that's the fun part in terms of experimentation, but back to standardization. What type of documents or what level of documentation is required to make this workflow scalable? Like, what are you guys doing to make this very simple or usable?
So from a workflow perspective, I think the big one you want to first focus on is most teams try to scale AI before they've made it viable. So I will say, before we are scaling it, you first want to demonstrate the viability of whatever initiative you're doing. So I go back to my old roots about having a lightweight project management process where you are saying, this is my end goal of this project, and this is how I'm going to break it down into smaller phases. I say my phase 0 is demonstrating the small step of this process. And then as part of it, I'm also listing out who are the groups I would like to be testing with. And then I also have a project champion. I will say a lot of enterprise initiatives fail because of lack of project champion and sponsor. So as someone like Erick, you are at the advantage where you could probably sponsor a project once you're convinced of the value. In some of the other organizations, I think access to the decision maker is important. And unless they are bought into it, it's hard to see the end of the tunnel for that process. So I'd say definitely bake in a project sponsor or a project champion. How you define it is up to you, and make sure the champion signs off on the effort that's needed. Because no matter how much of fancy ideas you have, unless your champion buys into the product, it is going to fail, or it is going to be abandoned in the middle. And then you get into the cyclical loop of heavy documentation, lack of executive support, unscalable results, and then a bad pill in your mouth about AI. I feel like that's a string that could be cut down if you follow basic process improvement and project management processes. Make sure you have a sponsor, clearly list out how many hours. I love the way you said 100 hours. List out specifically what your MVP is, what your next step is, minimum viable product, what your next step is, and then give them a ballpark. How many hours of time are you planning to use? And then when are you going to use that, to make sure they don't feel like this is a sunk cost. Because executives are worried about sunk costs about AI. And one way of making that work is take a smaller increment, give them that upfront notice about the number of hours you're spending, and then have a check-in point where you can say, after 3 weeks, I'm going to present what I did, and then we'll have a go, no-go decision at that point. So again, basic documentation, basic steps in that, I'm going to quickly repeat it, the project champion, your increment, your investment in terms of hours, the types of resources you need, and then the next check-in point. Just lightweight documentation around that process will go a long way in getting success from your initiatives.
Love it. And you bring up a good point too, because as I consider ourselves, we're around 50 people in terms of animators, illustrators, e-learning professionals, but we're still a small organization, and it's within our culture to be innovative, and I'm not just self-promoting, right? But the point I'm making is a lot of our association clients or these medical professional societies, they're not as enthusiastic, right? I do see a lot of potential with individuals on the team that have this hunger and enthusiasm to test and experiment, but they don't necessarily have that adoption across the board, right? Or it's not a priority. And for us, I even have to tell the team, like, hey, we're getting a little too advanced. You know what I mean? Like there's too much of a bridge here from the way we see things to how our clients are starting to see things, because we've leaned into it. We've drank the Kool-Aid. Now, on that point, how do you get organization or leadership buy-in, right? How do you make this a strategic priority from the people that matter to get that sponsorship?
Yeah, and great point. And I think that's one of the most important pieces in your AI journey. And I'm probably going to repeat myself, but I think it's worth the repeat. One of the biggest challenges we see with implementations is most teams put the cart in front of the horse type of thing, where they try to scale AI before they've made it viable. So it's very, very important to first make sure you demonstrate the viability of AI in whatever increment makes the most sense to your leadership. Now, I said your leadership intentionally because obviously it has to make sense to you, but it has to make sense to your executive sponsor. Unless you get that definition of what's valuable, I think both of you are going to talk on different pages, and it might lead down a path of, again, a rabbit hole where both of you don't feel like you're getting the best out of it. So to give you an example, if I'm trying to demonstrate the ROI of, let's say, using an AI tool for RFP, standardizing RFP processes. Let's take that example. So we as an organization, we receive hundreds of RFPs all the time from our prospects. If I were to demonstrate the ROI of an AI tool, the first step I would start to do is I would first take the tool that the company approved, work on my last RFP, and build a simple use case to say, this RFP took me X hours to do it myself. I involved 4 of my staff members in this exercise. All of us spent 100 hours on this RFP. I just did my own pet project on use of generative AI and did this small pet project with previous RFPs, and I was able to get the same output in, let's say, 30 hours. Now, if I just do that basic analysis and present it to my executives team to say, hey, this is like just back of the envelope calculation. I didn't spend too much of time. I spent like 20 hours because it was an RFP that was coming up. I got this great result. Chances are that my leadership would take note of that because they understand what that 70-hour advantage is, 100 hours versus 30 hours. And then they are probably going to give me more resources to say, hey, I'm going to have our deployment engineer help you automate the RFP with our CRM system, with our internal sales systems, and with our internal documentation system. Now that's step 2. So back to your question, if I just went to my leadership and said, I really think AI tool is going to help, give me 3 hours of deployment time, I want to have an integration with CRM, with Salesforce and other systems, what do you think my leadership would say? So chances are that, great job, Raja, let's talk next month. So it's just going to die right there. So I feel like until you made it viable, the onus is on you to make it viable. If you believe it's going to be successful, you either have to do a smaller increment of it or come up with an objective evidence that makes it very clear that there is light and this idea is worth processing. I think that's the first step in getting management buy-in. And I feel like once you're able to convert it in a language that they speak, the buy-in, the resources, the time commitment, the money would automatically flow in organically. I'm sure that executives know how to plan things. That's how they built the empire. The bigger thing they want is they have 100 things on their plate. How do you focus on that one thing that you are passionate about and your executive is passionate about?
Yeah, I love it.
Really big ROI.
So starting with the small win, right? Something that you can manage internally, get the small win and sell that to the executives. From there, you can get more resources to essentially capture a bigger win and change the culture of the organization. Because that's the process, right? You want to make sure that when they see that quantifiable output, it's measurable, something that, you know, this is worth actually experimenting with a somewhat of a larger budget. And then the idea is you can cascade that win to another one, And like I said, I really do think there's a need to transform the culture with some of our clients, right? Just because they have this, and I would say it's a combination of two things. It's a bit of a conservative mindset, right? They've already are a successful organization. They've built this empire. And so part of it's fiscal, right? And I know a lot of executives see the value in terms of dollars, right? Okay, great. We can save time. We can save money. What are your suggestions on overcoming the risk aspect? Because I think that's the other part that we're running into is like, how do we deal with the risk on this side?
I think first and foremost, be upfront with it. If you are able to tell your executives about the potential limitations of this and the potential risks, they're going to be more open towards trying it. Because most of the times, if you are the person who's more balanced in the approach, they're more likely to listen to your idea in totality. And it does require some work on your end as well. It also, I think, requires some objective analysis where you distance the emotional aspect of a cool AI tool versus the reality of it. Now, I'll be honest, it hasn't helped me with 100% of automating the RFP. The tool that I'm suggesting had some creative answers where the product didn't even do that. So I was very honest with my team where we said, hey, I think this is going to help me get to 70% of it. And the next 30% of it, I'm being realistic. I am going to reach out to the solutions engineer and maybe our documentation to make sure that we are presenting the finalized output. So I think there's always, if you think about the executive mindset, there's always the advantage of a gain and fear of loss. I feel like fear of loss has a more pull. And Erick, you'll have to tell me, being in that executive shoe, the fear of loss is a big consideration where they want to minimize risk at all costs while thinking about maximizing gains. So if you can tell them the type of risk that your tool or your solution is exposing to and be upfront about it, I think it will help you go a longer way than saying, this is going to be fantastic. It's going to automate 100% of our workflows, and all of us are going to get $100 million with this tool. You know, that thing is not going to get you too far with those kinds of, imbalanced views.
I love it. I think that's a perfect way to build trust as an advisor and a consultant, right? Is to give a fair and honest approach, right? Like, this is what we're expecting. These are some of the limitations, and here's some of the risks that we're going to actively try to avoid. And to answer your question, on my side, the thing that scares me most, it's, okay, yes, there's some liabilities issues, but it's also going to be, what happens if we don't lean into this and our competitors are, right? So I'm not worried about, there's processes we can deploy to avoid copyright issues or IP concerns, right? And fortunately, I've done the research. We first thing we did with our AI policy was spend a lot of time building competency within our leadership. Once we had the competency, we were able to structure some policies to reduce risk. So my big fear as a leader is tied to the world that's changing around us, right? What happens if we're not able to keep the pace? Because everyone in our industry has a changed expectation on the potential, right? And from the media creation side, that's our business. People, if you're still producing things like it's 1997 and 2026, like, there is a clear problem, right? There's no excuse. In the past, you could say, well, we're a small organization, we don't have a lot of money, but now there's, and the amount of capacity teams are going to have is going to be increasing, and it's giving these smaller organizations a boost. So I love the approach in terms of being very honest. And from my perspective, I just, what would sell me on an idea is like, okay, we have to address this risk, but also by doing this, we're addressing this larger risk, which you should have at the top of your mind.
100%. Help them minimize risk and maximize gain.
Love it. So, Raja, I love the time. Again, this has even the whole concept of getting buy-in can be its own 1-hour session. I mean, you can teach a class on that, right? That's and I do think a lot of associations need that too, especially with the way the world's changing. But with that being said, I want to be respectful of your time. And what is one good way for people to get a hold of you, right? I like to set this up so people can reach out to you if they have questions. I'm assuming LinkedIn's a good option, but what's the best way for people to get in touch?
Yeah, LinkedIn, and then I'll be happy to share my email and other social media. Love to be in touch. And if you have any other ideas from the viewers as well, love to hear from how you've adopted AI, and then any other topics that you'd like to hear from us. Love to keep it going and help you any way we can.
Love it. Thank you, Raja. I appreciate it, and have a great day.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. Have a good one.
Want to learn more about microlearning best practices? We've got you covered. Check out the video cards for more related content. Don't forget to subscribe for weekly tips and explore the description for a curated list of resources to continue your e-learning journey.